Ooh, recording in progress as well. Okay, this is. Oh, people are in. Okay.
Can everyone hear us, Yasmin?
Yeah. Now people can hear us. Yeah. Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining us tonight. While we let everyone trickle in, I'm just going to ask you to put your name and where you're calling from in the chat, just so we can get better acquainted. Hi, Ali. Rami from Dearborn. Rami, you put it in the wrong space, but hi, Rami. Royal Oak, Dearborn. Awesome. We want you all to use the chat, Christy from Wayne, just to make this a more interactive conversation. Livonia. All right, awesome. New Jersey, hi Hiba. Celine, Michigan. Detroit. Oh, Toronto. Hi, Mariam. Awesome. So I think so far everybody's in sort of like night mode. Nobody's on the West Coast, so we're all wrapping up our days. Oh, we do have someone from San Francisco. Hi, Ali. Awesome. All right, we're gonna wait a couple minutes, let people trickle in, and then we're gonna start. But thank you all for being here. We're so excited to host this conversation. Hi, Farah. Speakers, where are you guys from, right? Where are you calling from?
I am in Dearborn.
Dearborn as well.
I'm calling in from Lenape land in Queens, Astoria, New York.
Awesome.
Well, my heart's in Dearborn.
All right, we can get started actually. So I'm Yasmin, I'm the co-founder of Dearborn Girl. And for those of you that don't know what Dearborn Girl is, we're a community space that carves out authentic media representation for Arabs and Muslims. And at the intersection of that is really equipping our community with language and resources to be advocates when issues uniquely impact us. And that's where we find ourselves today. So we're super excited to host this conversation along with Palestinian Youth Movement and our rock star hosts, Sahar, Ali, and Kamelya. We want this to be super interactive, so please feel free to use the chat function, use the questions. If there's ever an opportunity where a speaker asks you to speak, either you can turn on your camera or you can just do audio, whatever you're most comfortable with. But we really just want this to be a space where you're learning, you're growing, and you feel like you can make change when this is over. So thank you all for being here. And without further ado, I'm going to pass it over to our speakers.
Salam, peace everyone. My name is Sahar Faraj. I am the general coordinator with the Palestinian Youth Movement Detroit chapter. The Palestinian Youth Movement is a transnational grassroots Arab-led youth organization dedicated to the liberation of all oppressed people. So you can follow us on Instagram at PalestinianYouthMovement.com. At Palestinian Youth Movement, and visit our website at PalestinianYouthMovement.com, as well as our Facebook. But I think what we're all speakers have decided on to do, starting with, is like a grounding exercise of how we ended up here. So I'm going to begin by saying again, Ismi Sahar Faraj. My name is Sahar Faraj. I'm a Palestinian, born and raised on Anishinaabe land, or Detroit. My my dad is from Bat Hanina, which is a village outside. Hi, Randa, that's my cousin in the chat. Anyway, so my dad is from Bet Hanina, which is a village that is outside of the city of Jerusalem, and my mom is actually from Jerusalem. So I'm like city village girl here, right? My family, the story of my family and how we ended up here first starts in 1967, which is very well known in the Arab historical context of the Naksa, or the setback, right? Which is further identified as the Arab-Israeli War in 1967. And this was the first instance that my family had faced, not the first instance, but one of the first times that my family were actually displaced from our home, which presented the trajectory of coming onto these lands here, these colonized lands here. So in 67, during that war, that was the first time that my grandmother had to leave on foot, carrying my father in her hands as well as my aunt in her hands, miles and miles and miles from the village outside of Jerusalem city, because that is when the 67 war, to back up, is when is further known as the Naksa, or the setback, because that is when the Zionist occupation force further colonized all of Palestinian land, which meant that the territories of Gaza and the West Bank were then brought under military occupation under the Israeli occupational forces, as well as the IOF then militarily occupied the Sinai Peninsula, as well as Golan Heights. So that sets the scene of what first sent my family to here, to these lands, right? Being driven out of our homes in 67 for the planes and the bombs. I mean, like, my grandmother just talks about how days on foot and no food, no water, no nothing, but grabbing your kids and going, because, you know, you're just trying to survive. That's all you think about. And then you get back to 1969, which is when my grandfather, Allah yarhamah my Sidi, he was able to start the process of bringing my family here, because Bet Hanina, which is the village that they all used to live in, is pretty much empty right now. Every time we go into that village to go visit my grandfather's grave, Allah yarhamah, because although he moved here in 1969 due to Zionist displacement, he, like all Palestinians, he returned, right? So in 1969 is the year that my grandfather began the shift of moving my family from Palestine, our ancestral lands and homeland in Palestine, to here on occupied Anishinaabe land in Detroit. And yeah, so that's how my family ended up here, and how Zionism had affected my life and displaced us on these colonized lands. And Kamelya or Ali, whoever wanted to go next.
Thank you, Sahar, for grounding us and for sharing your family's story. I will sort of give you my context, why my family came here, which is also a direct result of be it the Israeli occupation of Lebanon, the war, the civil war, and specifically the sort of economic policies of neoliberalism post Cold War, the policies that we don't really talk about, that have actually emptied out our homelands systematically in order to dilute movements. And so that's also something that, like, we're dealing with when we're talking about in context. So my father first immigrated here in I don't talk about this publicly. I don't talk about this publicly, right? And so that's
which is
also
another thing to address, right?
Yeah, exactly, right. And is that I don't talk about this publicly. There's a lot of sort of not shame, but fear that's instilled in us in terms of how we talk about our families in the geopolitical context, because our parents want to keep, being able, and we should, thank you, Rhonda. So essentially, as a person in the Lebanese Civil War, as my father was, he was somebody who was interested in fighting for justice. My father's family, they would host Palestinian fighters in their home, and they would like sleep there and they would feed them even during the Civil War. And so we don't often hear those perspectives from Lebanese people. So I'll add that to it. And so my father, being a politicized family, here we go. My father was he had to leave. He was forced to leave by his family because they didn't want him to participate in the war. So then what he ended up doing was traveling to Jordan and elsewhere. And then in 1979, they started issuing mass visas to people specifically from Bint Jbeil. You guys can look this up. It's in a book called Bint Jbeil, Michigan, by a professor at LAU named Ahmed Baidoun. It's written in Arabic. Nobody's yet translated it into English, but he's a well-known linguist professor at LAU. I'm going on too long. Ahmed Baidoun basically talks about the systemic sort of the issuing of mass visas for southern Lebanese people in Bint Jbeil who had been involved with the workers' unions and workers' movements. And the United States was issuing mass visas at the time of the Cold War. Remember, it's the Red Scare. They're trying to kill communist movements everywhere where they can do them, or worker-centered movements. So my father received one of those batches of visas, which are described as just like a casual visa. So we need to figure out, we still need people who are doing research on this to figure out what specifically that policy was, because we don't have a specific name for it, and we're living history. And I think that's a part of this exercise too, is to recognize that we are a part of living history. So my father received one of those visas and came to America as a student, and they issued those visas so that folks could go to Detroit specifically so they could work on the assembly lines. So that's like the direct line, is worker to worker. Okay, so that's one thing. The second thing is that my mom came over in 1983 after having endured not only the Civil War, but the Israeli invasion of Lebanon. And she came through, my grandmother found ways to hustled to get everybody visas in whatever way you can, under the table, over the table, officially, unofficially, however you do it, you got to do it. If that means you're walking to the embassy with a broken leg, you're walking to the embassy with a broken leg. And that's how my mom came to America. It was also through an initial marriage that was initially abusive, and so like that's also the stuff that women endured. And my father it was not her first husband, and so these are the things that also specifically women endure, and they carry these things on their backs as they come to new countries. 19 years old on their own, they don't know what they're doing. So that's my history. I was born and raised in Dearborn. Thank you.
Thanks, Kamelya and Sahar and Yasmin, and thanks everyone for being here. And sorry for disappearing a few seconds. We've been doing this remote work thing for over a year, and of course, the day of this webinar, my camera thing pops off and falls down for the first time in over a year. So that's why I disappeared for a few seconds. My name is Ali Abazeed, and it's difficult to sort of talk about my story without talking about the story of my ancestors, and taking an indigenous American approach, which is to think about 6 generations backward and 6 generations forward. I won't go that far, but I will tell you that I come from a long line of diplomats and resistance fighters from Syria. My parents are Syrian, I am Syrian, and my father was a professor in Syria in the 50s and 60s and 70s, and he was a political dissident who spoke out against the human rights abuses at the time in Syria that are still ongoing in Syria. And he was forced from his home country, he was arrested, he was harassed, he was tortured. Had he stayed in Syria, he would have been killed. My family would have been killed. I would not be here today. And so my parents are Syrian refugees by way of Algeria, having spent 8 years in a country that they had no previous affiliation with. My mother's story is also central here. Her father was a civil servant in Syria for over 45 years. Her grandfather was a diplomat working with the Ottoman Empire. You remember during the Ottoman time, Greater Syria constitutes current-day Palestine, Jordan, Syria, and Lebanon. And my great-grandfather helped broker peace between the French and the Ottoman. He was a man that, a lot of folks speak very fondly of during the times that I was able to visit Syria. My parents were uprooted. I mean, the story, the crucible of separation is something that we'll be talking about at length today, but separation leaves a mark, man, and separation comes in different forms, but the separation from the land that you were destined to live in, to work in, to fulfill your destiny that you thought you had, and then to be uprooted and, you know, to be uprooted and planted in another land, and then to be forced to come to America. My dad was a professor, like I said, and he drove a taxi cab in Detroit for 25 years. And there's no one above any line of work. I mean, work is work is work. But for someone who used his mind for over 60 years of his life to then come to the States and drive people around, is a bit of a tragedy on its own. My mom had the unenviable task of raising 7 children as a poor working class woman. She had a couple different jobs growing up, and they really afforded us the opportunity not to live out the American dream, which is a fading dream and arguably a dream that's never existed, but they allowed us to constitute our own dreams and to be able to fulfill the kinds of destinies that they had for themselves in their home countries, for ourselves here in this, our new home country. And so I'm really excited to be here today. I'm really excited to uncomplicate this myth. I'm really excited to cut through some of the myths that we hear so often in society. And I really appreciate you all being here today.
So before we get started, we do have a presentation. I don't want it to take up space because I do want you guys to keep like hearing folks in the space, but I want to ask my co-presenters, what do you guys think? Should I pull it up, or we could just get started? I'm gonna pull it up just to have the question so everybody can look at the question.
Yeah.
Okay. So thank you, Ali. Thank you, Sahar. Thank you, everybody, for being here. What I am inviting everybody to do right now is to answer this question for yourself. How did you get here? How did your family get here? What do you know about your story, your family's story? What's missing from your story? What information has been taken away from you in terms of your story? I want you to ask all those questions for yourself. Even if you don't got the answers, we at least got to start, because that's the initial work of decolonizing, is figuring out how we got here. America is built on the fact that they don't expect anybody to ask how we got here. They just want us to move from the present moment and operate with the status quo. And we're here to look deep and look back and move through it. So I want to invite you all. Let's take about three minutes. Good for a grounding writing exercise for everybody. Pen to paper, just keep writing and ask yourself, how did I get here? How did my family get here? What do you know? What don't you know? And what has been taken away from you? About a minute left. I'm going to bring us all back. If now, while being mindful of time, I also want to create space for anybody who feels like they had something to share. You can raise your, I don't know exactly how the thing works. If anybody wants to raise their hand to talk in the Q&A, Yasmin, do you know how to do it?
Yeah, so you just press allowed to talk if someone raises their hand.
If somebody raises their hand. Do we have any hands raised? Y'all can raise your hands if anybody wants to share. Okay. Okay, we got one. Shelby wants to contribute and Jihan. Okay. Shelby and then Jihan. Go ahead, Shelby.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. I don't want to take up too much space, but what you said about, the United States setting up, this system where like we don't really know about our past and that we like are living from the present and all that, like that really resonated with me. Just really fast, like my family is, like my mom's grandparents came to Nevada to work, and they eventually moved to like Michigan for jobs from Germany. My dad's side of the family is Osage and European, and I was always told that that was consensual, and I just really wonder like how much of that is true. And other than that, I don't know much about my family story, and I just grew up thinking I had to make my own story and my own culture because I'm just not connected to my ancestors. So
Thank you for sharing that, Shelby. And yeah, you're bringing up really important points that you said it all, and I'm excited to continue moving together as and collective as movement, individually but like together in spirit as we figure out our stories and bring them to the forefront, because this is important for us to, as we talk about advocating for Palestine right now, it's important to also think about our own stories, because that can help us sort of see the greater picture. Thank you, Shelby. I got another hand up from Rhonda. Oh. Rhonda, are you here?
Can you hear me? Hello?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Okay, salam. How are you guys?
Good, alhamdulillah. How are you?
I'm very well. So the question was actually really, really awesome. For me as a Palestinian, my story collaborates a little bit with Sahar, since her grandfather is my uncle, and he was the one who brought my family here. My father was actually born in 1948, and my grandmother, along with her, Sahar's father, all traveled to a Christian city where they hosted entire family and my father was born in that city. In regards to what Jihan was saying earlier, I really recommend that people really do know where they come from and really have that connection with their roots and their culture. As for me as a Palestinian and my family, we're actually blessed because it's something that we've never forgotten. In terms of of her grandfather, his right to return, and he did. He died in his homeland, and he wouldn't want it any other way. And that was an example and a legacy that our family, that we live by. And as Palestinians now, our movement, we need to really collaborate and understand what's really, really happening in terms of those mass visas that you were talking about. This is just ways, and it's unfortunately happening, with in our Black community, where they just want to erase us. And apartheid is real. And this mission of that they're having is much more deep rooted than just Palestine. We're all connected in that way, and I just feel that this is the time, especially with this positive energy that we're getting from our community, to continue to stand and to stand for everybody, not only just for Palestine, for Yemen, for what's happening in Africa and all over the world. We really just need to collaborate and continue with this unit because we have been heard and we have been seen. I protested with my parents saying, Reagan, you should know we support the PLO as a child. And for people to say that protesting and going to the streets don't make a difference, yes, it does make a difference. And this is the first time I can tell you in my life I've marched in Washington. I have never seen the world react to this. And we just need to continue and educate our community and stand together because we will return.
I love you, Renda. That's my cousin, guys. She, just a preface, when we talk about ancestral struggles, and when we talk about specifically the Palestinian struggle, it's really ancestral. And I want to go even further to say that the Arab struggle is something that is passed down collectively to us all as well. And that's the stuff that's actually passed down. Like my cousin Renda used to take me to protests when I was a kid and used to tell me about Free Palestine, even while we were doing like things like playing soccer and stuff. And now I was talking to her kids and talking to them about the actions and the protests that we're starting. So when we talk about this struggle and this fight for liberation is ancestral and we quite literally pass it down, it's not a joke. When we were, just a quick snippet before we go on to any more comments, but as we were organized, the Palestinian Youth Movement, Detroit chapter was organizing for the Nakba action that we had on May 15th here in Dearborn at the Arab American Museum. I went to Nice Price to go buy like Palestinian flag, and then where I met the owner, who's Palestinian, who knew my grandfather, Allah yarhamah, my Sidi, who's buried, whose remains are in Palestine in my village of Bet Hanina that is completely empty, but for the guy that comes and opens the gravesite whenever we visit him. He told me that you're doing the same exact thing that your Sidi did, that your grandfather did. And that's just how you know that what we're doing is right, when you're walking in the footsteps of your grandfather and of your family. So that's just to add on. Thank you, Renda, for sharing. I love you.
Yeah, take your kids to protest, y'all. Take your little cousins to protest. That it lives inside your bodies. Thank you, Renda. Thank you, everybody.
I think now I was going to touch on Sheikh Jarrah and kind of set the scene so we can start all contributing. Or Ali, what did you want to touch on?
I think that's what we're going to do. I think we're going to give you guys just a cursory sort of context. We're going to talk about Sheikh Jarrah as sort of the impetus for the ongoing and well-deserved attention on Palestine now, why this feels different. And we want to root this in history to allow you all the tools and, more importantly, the language to be able to sort of go back to your people, go back to your communities, go back to your workplaces, and never again use the word war, or never again use the word conflict, to feel more confident in using words like ethnic cleansing and dispossession and apartheid and settler colonialism. So I think what we're going to do here is some stage setting, and I think Sahar is going to get us started, and then we're going to define some common terms that we're going to be using so that we're all on the same page. And then we want this to be kind of a freestyle. You know, we want some of your interaction, some of your questions. We want this to be as informal as possible, and we want to have fun too. So, you know, goosebumps and fun is part of the resistance as well.
Thanks, Ali, for that. So how did we get here, right? We talked about how we got here, but then how did the Palestinian uprising become such a prominent epicenter in Western propaganda media, right? And that takes us to Sheikh Jarrah and Silwan, which are villages that are being militarily occupied and under threat of forced ethnic cleansing and annexation under the guise of both the Zionist entity as well as U.S.-backed settler organizations. But not only does the U.S. fund the Zionist entity directly, it also funds these settlers that are rampaging around in the villages in Palestine, in Sheikh Jarrah and in Silwan. They also fund those people as well. So, you know, Palestinian people, just to look at, you know, just that, you know, perspective right from the get-go, we have the US giving money to the Zionist entity, both in actual cash dollars, as well as, if we all heard that they're asking for another $1 billion, but also in the form of weapons. So we have that, and then we also have the avenue of the US funding directly the settlers that are going in and causing violence and destruction of property and destruction of homes and forcibly kicking out Palestinians out of their homes. Sheikh Jarrah is a village that sits in East Jerusalem. East Jerusalem, under the guise of international law, is not supposed to be occupied. The Zionist entity, under international law, as well as its own laws of occupation, should not be forcing and enforcing military occupation, the forced ethnic displacement, as well as annexation of Palestinians from their homes. There should be no legitimacy. But by now, I think history has shown us time and time again that that the Zionist entity hardly ever listens to the rules that it creates and subjects other people to. Sheikh Jarrah is in Silwan, which is the other villages under direct threat of Zionist occupational force annexation, military, and military bombardment as well as that as well. They became the epicenter because they were, the reality on the ground was that they were directly confronting Zionism. And when we're talking about ethnic cleansing, let's take a step back and define what Zionism is, right? So Zionism, for those who have heard that term, and know its correlation to Israel, and why we call it the Zionist entity. Zionism is a political ideology, and it's based, Zionism is a political ideology that was organized in the 1800s by a man named Theodor Herzl, who's a European. It's a political ideology that came to colonize Palestine by way of imperialism. And imperialism, i.e. through Britain, first through the British Mandate of 1922, and now through American and US support by funding that we talked about, as well as the weapons that we've talked about, Zionism came to then occupy Palestine. So as a political ideology, it sits within the framework of racism, the way that racism functions here within the US context, right? Because they're both oppressive ideologies, and their main purpose is to provide legitimacy and thus excuse the systematic oppression of our people. And to say other words, in very simply, in very non-convoluted language, Zionism is racism. And we know, and I think we understand, and it's been common knowledge, especially due to the Black Lives Matter uprisings and George Floyd uprisings that occurred last year, that Zionism is racism, and racism has been inherently understood on the international consensus that is structural, it's institutional. I want to make very, very, very clear that to be racist or to be Zionist is not a question of attitude. It's not a question of mental illness or how somebody thinks. Because Kwame Ture, who is a revolutionary and a Pan-Africanist, who was anti-Zionist through and through, explained very clearly that racism It's not a question of attitude, but a question of power. Because if a white supremacist has the power to lynch me, wants to lynch me, that could be his problem all day, every day. But if he has the power to lynch me, if he has the power to act on his ideology, then that is when I have to, where I have the right to defend myself. So Zionism, to bring that back to Palestinian on the ground in reality in Sheikh Jarrah, we see this exercise on the daily, because Zionism isn't a question of attitude. It's not a question of the mental illness that we know that these settlers have. Like they're not just thinking weird, right? It's a power dynamic. Zionism is a power dynamic. The reason why that settlers can go in and quite literally occupy rooms in Palestinian homes without any impunity is because of the military might of the occupational force being right behind them. And the most beautiful thing about this is y'all don't even have to take my word for it, yo. You can literally, literally go on Muna al-Qud story on Instagram. You can go on Muhammad al-Qud story on Instagram and Muna Hawa and look at every day. They go live and they show videos. And there's different Instagram accounts that have been created that show the impunity of Zionism as a racist ideology. They show how Zionism is not like a mental illness. It's not there's nothing wrong with somebody. It's a power dynamic. The reason why Zionism exists, the reason why Zionism is in the face of Palestinians on the daily and acts as a repressive and oppressive force is because of the military occupation enforcing that, because of the disproportionate power dynamic, which allows for Zionist institutional and systematic natures to oppress us. So that's the way that Zionism works. And that's how, and that has been the, thank you, Kamelya. And that has been the reality in Sheikh Jarrah. So Sheikh Jarrah became the epicenter because then we were seeing in real life time, we were seeing settlers barging in, IDF soldiers, IOF soldiers barging into Palestinian homes and throwing speakers out the room, throwing children out of their homes at 3 o'clock in the morning. They're arresting, they're asking people for their IDs as they're standing outside their homes. They're not allowing people to walk outside of their village to go buy food. I mean, we're talking again to relate this back to when I was opening up and telling you how I got here, of my grandmother fleeing during the Naksa and being unable to take food, water, and clothing with her just because of survival. So when we're talking about Sheikh Jarrah and Silwan, and we're talking about Naksa and Nakba, we're talking about how Zionism is a current, ongoing settler colonial project. It is not something that happened in the 60s. It's not something that happened and stayed in 48. This is something that is happening currently. And to provide a little bit more context about Sheikh Jarrah before I pass it on to my colleagues, or my comrades, Sheikh Jarrah, to show I think we've all seen that Palestinian map, right? Where we see the entirety of 48 historic Palestine and how the possession of land in the hand of the Arab Palestinians have gone and dissipated to a mere dwindling of like little to no percentage of land. Israel is also the only entity that has undefined borders, right? When under international law, you're supposed to have defined borders as well, right? So Sheikh Jarrah, to show the trajectory of occupation, to show the trajectory of how this is the ongoing ethnic cleansing of Palestinian people, land, and resources, is Sheikh Jarrah is one of the last villages within East Jerusalem. If Sheikh Jarrah is to fall, that means Jerusalem is to fall. And that's what people in Sheikh Jarrah are saying. And then one last thing to finish providing context to Sheikh Jarrah, because it gets really easy to kind of just look at it as if it just came out of nowhere, right? Sheikh Jarrah has always been there. The Zionist entity has always been occupying Palestine, but that's not the reality. My grandmother was born in a free Palestine. You know what I'm saying? Sheikh Jarrah was created in 1956, this village that is now under threat 65 years later in 2021 by the same Zionist entity that created it, or that necessitated the creation of it in 1956 by the UN, the UNHRW, the UN So it was created by the UNHRA in 1956 due to the initial Nakba that was created in 1948 that sent to ethnic cleansing. And we're talking about ethnic cleansing, we're talking about the destruction of homes, not being able to come back to your land. We're talking about the death of people, the annihilation of families, We're talking about Gaza. There was reported in the recent bombardment by the Zionist entity of Gaza, we have families that are no longer in existence. and our culture. So so now 65 years later, we're presented again with the facts that Nakba and Naksa are ongoing Zionist settler colonial projects. These are the terms that we're going to use. These are the terms that Palestinians on the ground are using. They are the Israeli occupational forces that have now been moving on in Sheikh Jarrah, which again was a village that was created in 1956 to first gather all the internally displaced Palestinians from the 1948 territory that Zionists first expelled from. And now, today in 2021, 65 years later, is under threat of annexation one more time. And with that, I kind of wanted to end with that, and then would like love Kamelya or Ali, please jump in, or questions, however you guys want to move on with this. Sorry, I went on for a little bit of a rant there.
Kamelya, you want to jump in and provide some more context? I'm also happy to.
Yeah, go ahead, and then I'll add in as you will. Sahar, thank you for that impassioned and super informative and centering intro.
Yeah. So Sahar got us started. I mean, you can see how already this is such a simple story that's rooted in the dispossession of a people from their native land, and why we need to be thinking about centering Palestinians, because, Rashid Khalidi, who's a professor at Columbia, wrote a wonderful book that I recommend all of you look into. It's called The 100 Years War on Palestine. I mean, it really just deconstructs and demystifies this entire thing, if you're interested in that kind of thing, which I think is really important. So I'm going to try to do a quick and dirty, just 1 to 2 minutes sort of high level overview of all of the good, awesome material that Sahar provided for us, and let you know why this is entirely simple, because this is fundamentally rooted in an idea of settler colonialism. And settler colonization itself, it's when a dominant group of people or a system takes over and exploits a native people and their land. And so, in the 18 and 1900s, colonialism was very popular. I mean, you had successful colonialist projects in North America take root. You had successful projects in India, in Australia, and New Zealand. And then you had the Zionist ideology be born from that. And so the ideology of Zionism, of a majority Jewish state for Jewish people, was continuing the long legacy of settler colonialism that was already happening across the world. And so, Zionism just continues that trend. World War II happens, and that really, things change around World War II. You start seeing a lot of countries that are former colonies of the British Empire start to decolonize, which is effectively, absolving themselves of any kind of ties to their colonialist entity. And so you see a lot of decolonization happening around World War II. You see a lot of things happening between the end of the Ottoman Empire around 1910 to 1940. You obviously have a World War I and a World War II that happens. You have an Arab population that is indigenous to the land that's currently called Israel and the occupied territories. You had Arabs living there, you had Jews living there, you had a lot of people living in unity. And the Arabs lived in unity with Jewish people, by the way, in Damascus, in Baghdad, in Cairo, all over the Middle East and North Africa. And so what you start to see is a movement, the Zionist movement, thinking about, well, where's a spot where our people can settle? And that spot that they settle on is in historic Palestine. And so you start to see settler colonialism ideologies take root there. The Arabs notice what's happening. They weren't oblivious. They knew what was happening. They were living in coexistence with their Jewish brothers and sisters, but they also start to notice that Zionism is a serious danger. And so they start to protest. They start to riot. You have the great Arab riots of 1936 to 1939, where the British Empire comes down incredibly hard on the Arab population. And not only that, but they start to arm Zionist terrorist groups to also not only quell those uprisings between 36 and 39, but then to have an armed militia presence to then start to terrorize the Arab population between 1939 and 1948. And so what happens is anti-Semitism is rampant across Europe. This is a serious thing that was happening from 1850 to 1950, where you have pogroms in Russia and you have pogroms pogroms across Eastern and Central Europe. And from that movement, and then from the obvious sort of story of what happened in World War II, where Jewish people were almost annihilated, I mean, by a hateful rhetoric and ideology espoused by Nazi Germany. They were almost annihilated. And guess who closed their door to Jewish refugees, by the way? The United States, the United Kingdom, a bunch of former settler colonial projects. And so out of 1948, what happens is the United Nations gives 55% of the land to the Jewish population there that owned only 6% of the land. And then the rest of the 45% was given to the 94% Arab population. The Arab countries bordering Palestine aren't having it. They go to war. And then there's a sort of new normal there where the international entities start to acknowledge, well, Israel is here. And then you have the War of 1967, where Israel expands on their settler colonial project. They take over the Golan Heights in Syria. They take over Gaza and the Sinai Peninsula from Egypt. They take over Jerusalem from the Jordanians. And then from 1967 to the present day, you start to see this normalization of Israel being an occupied power, and an occupied power that is in contravention of international law, is continuing to expand their settlements. And they are doing that in the modern day, which links us to the ongoing Nakba that's happening in Sheikh Jarrah. The people in Sheikh Jarrah, by the way, are refugees from Jaffa and Haifa in 1948. And these are the people that in 2021, their memory is stoked, their trauma is stoked from 1948 to 2021. And that's what you see happening today, is an ongoing spotlight on a Nakba, which is translated to the catastrophe that Palestinians have been enduring. We tend to think of the Nakba as a singular event. It wasn't a singular event. It was an event that was ongoing between 48 and 67, ongoing between 67 and 2021, and is ongoing now. And one final word I will say is that when we think of the Nakba, we tend to think about it as a thing that's not just a singular event in time, but a singular event in place. And so you start to think that, well, Palestinians are removed from that place. But Palestinians in the diaspora are also suffering from the Nakba because they're not allowed back to historic Palestine. Anyone who's Jewish around the world is entitled to Israeli citizenship. But if you're an Arab Palestinian refugee from 1948 or from 1967, you are not allowed to go back home. And so they are also enduring the Nakba. Cam, I'll hand it off to you.
Thank you guys for all of that, and then really like centering us in history. And I'm excited for our audience members. If you do have additional questions, please keep clocking them, pop them in the chat. We'll answer them as we go, and we'll also have Q&A time at the end. A couple things that I just want to highlight that you guys covered, but I'll go a little bit more. I don't know if it's in depth, but I'm just going to cover them. One is recognizing that anti-Semitism is fundamentally and historically a European problem. It is a European problem that had been rooted in class issues within Europe, where and I'll attach a text in here about the history of anti-Semitism from an anti-Zionist point of view, which is very important for us to sort of think about. And so the state of Israel was in part created in order to solve the issue of anti-Semitism, which, as you know, living in America today with the neo-Nazis that we live amongst, this has done nothing. Israel has not solved anti-Semitism, and anti-Semitism is not fundamentally an Arab problem, a Muslim problem. It is not a problem that had anything to do with the Palestinians. Like Ali said, that the similar to other religious minorities in the Arab world, which be they from Shia to like Christians of all different kinds, like in the Arab world, Jews were another among many religious minorities in the Arab world that all lived together. It wasn't perfect, but it wasn't Europe. And that's a very important point for us to recognize, is like, okay, so when we talk about the history about the establishment of the state of Israel, it is being there to solve a European problem. And it is creating more problems as it goes. And Judaism, of course, does not represent, Zionism does not represent Judaism. We have to keep reminding ourselves of that, and keep reminding people around us of that, and Americans of that especially, because they continue to associate Judaism with Zionism, and that is deeply anti-Semitic, to try to associate Judaism with a deeply political and imperial movement that is using European strategies that have been used historically to wipe out and genocide populations, that we are living in a time of an ongoing Nakba that we need to stand against. We've been talking about Palestine from Sahar's grandfather and even before that until now, because it is an ongoing issue that we can control. We have power to do this. And it is we are lucky. I'm lucky to be living in a time of Gen Z because some energy that has been brought to the table right now, which is also the accumulation of movements over time. So I just want to uplift that right now, the guts that everybody has, we got to continue to move with guts and to be fearless in the face of this, because the right, al-haq ma'na, the right is on our side.
Kamelya, can I add to that?
Please.
I love that. Thank you so much for saying all of that. And I'd like to jump in and touch on the fact that what Kamelya is talking about is, again, referencing that our struggle is ancestral. This stuff does not happen on accident. And I'd like to provide further clarity because we're talking about uncomplicating things. And like you said, like there's something about our generation, right? And what is it? What is it about our generation? And what clicked for me as a Palestinian who I identify as a revolutionary, and as a revolutionary, I believe in that my struggle for liberation is tied objectively into scientific socialism. So, because nothing is left to chance, because oppressors use science to hold us down. And an example I can share very, very briefly is that Gaza, we all know that Gaza is an open air prison, but what does that mean? Like we've all been just saying that Gaza is just an open air prison, like Israel has created an open air prison, but what does that mean? One material scientific fact, and why we have to understand that our struggle for liberation must be scientifically based in factual observation that can be viewed by all of us, because in Gaza, the way that we maintain the open air prison is that the Israeli defense minister, one of the Israeli defense ministers, talked about how the calorie intake of every Palestinian living in Gaza is calculated so that people are starving and not dying. And then after that kind of calculation, the sanctions start. Then we start talking about how much food do we let in? How much food do we not let in? What kind of water? What kind of access do we let out? So when we're talking about a revolution, we have to talk about it scientifically, because that is how it is determined against us. Second, what did I want to say? To touch on Kamelya talking about European history. Another anecdote by Kwame Ture, who is a revolutionary Pan-Africanist, who I urge all of you to learn more about. His name was, before becoming Kwame Ture, he was more prominently as Stokely Carmichael. He was the chairman of SNCC, the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, as well as the All-African Revolutionary Party, and was one of the founding organizers for the Black Panther Party in the Lowndes County Freedom Coalition when they were trying to, that's a lot of history. Anyway, so what he talks about is that we have to be very, very, very careful to not allow making the history of Europe the general history of the world. And that is what Kamelya is talking about. What happens, and that is something that we as Gen Z, we have to fight, because we went to schools in their school. We only learned their history. Decolonizing, we're talking about it, right? That means taking the space in our mind where we have had to occupy so much of European history and could not find any way for us to identify. We have to now replace with our own revolutionary history. We have to understand the way that our families and our parents did not just acquiesce. They have resisted. And that is the reason why we stand today, is because we continue to resist. And one last thing before I hand it back to Kamelya is when we're talking about anti-Semitism. Last anecdote by Kwame Ture. He's a very smart man. In understanding that our struggle is ancestral as a revolutionary, that means that time that my ancestors have spent speaking on my behalf, i.e. Ghassan Kanafani, talking about how in a interview where he was talking about when he was in discussion with a British reporter, saying that it's not a conflict, it's a colonial project that is an oppressor. It's a condition of oppression in an oppressed. And a lot of these conversations that Ghassan Kanafani dispelled all these rumors. So as a revolutionary, I understand that our point, and as the young and as the youth, is to push our conversation forward. That means not having the same conversations that Zionism put in front of as a barrier to successful liberation of our people. And Kwame Ture further defines an understanding that Semitism, to be a Semite, is a biological specification. To be a Semite is a biological specification, meaning as Arab, as Palestinians, as Syrians, as Lebanese, as we are Semitic people biologically because we are inherently from those lands. So we cannot be anti something that we inherently are. So that is another way to kind of combat that kind of argument, right? It's just a call. We're not going to have this conversation. Like, we already know you tried to convolute that definition of anti-Semitism to mean pro-Palestinian speak, but we understand that that is not a tactic that we can ignore because we know better. We have learned.
So really what we're trying to do here with the historical context is really to let you all know that, Palestine from the beginning until today is a very simple story of simple colonialism and dispossession, but the world does treat it like this multi-layered complexity that it isn't, right? They say it's hard to understand, and then they also justify that even further by saying it's even harder to solve. But the story of Palestine's been told before. It's a simple story of European settlers coming to a foreign land, settling there, and then either committing genocide against or expelling the indigenous people, or depopulating and then sort of importing their own people. So the Zionist movement didn't invent anything new in this respect. It simply just continued the long legacy of European settler colonialism, which was very much in high fashion all the way up until 1940s. And then after 1948, colonial projects had to sort of start to think about themselves as decolonizers. And so that's why you start to get all of these convoluted conversations around religious integrity and why this is about the Bible and why this is about a Jewish home for a Jewish people. But really, we want to distill this down to simple concepts of colonialism, of ethnic cleansing, and of dispossession. And I think we're going to continue with some more common terms, which also allow us to sort of segue into other concepts too. Would this be a good time to pause for questions, Cam, Yasmin, Sahar, or do we want to keep going?
I want to address Hiba's comment, if that's something that we want to do. Hiba, I can't see her last name, but Hiba, if you, I'm going to drop PY, the Palestinian Youth Movement Detroit chapter. We have a resource of Palestine 101 trainings that we can provide as workshop based. I'm going to drop PYM's, PYM Michigan is, I know it's like inconsistent, bear with me, but PYM Detroit, PYM Michigan, Gmail. But emails, saying that you want to, there's the email there. Email, explaining the kind of services you want. You're more than, we'll provide you with those resources and let you know of upcoming actions and events, because we actually have a political education. Well, this is serving as our political education for an action that we're mobilizing for on Saturday, right? So we teamed up with Dearborn Girl to provide this political education as an out resource so more people are accessible as alive. And on Saturday, we're going to be mobilizing at 5 p.m. at Ford Woods Park. At Ford Woods Park in commemoration of the Nexa, which is what we're talking about. And the last thing I'm going to address is Kevin, when he was mentioning the reference of the Nakba. So it is very common that Palestinians are now are becoming more, it's more relative that the term Nakba is used to describe the ongoing ethnic cleansing of Palestinian, to take away from the Zionist narrative that it was just a one-time deal kind of thing. When clearly realities and the historical conditions of the realities in Palestine on the ground have shown that you just continue to take land, more land, putting up these walls and checkpoints, more death, more arrests, more displacements. So so now the term has been taken back because we're talking about self-determination and determining, how things affect us. And Nakba is we're trying to use this historical term to show the reality of on the ground today is a continuation of those events of that day, if that makes sense.
Just to quickly add to that, I think that especially now, and what Palestinians have been saying for a long time, is that the Nakba never ended. This is like we're seeing it a lot right now. And it's very good that this is entering our vocabulary, because before, the Nakba was used primarily to talk about what happened in 1948 and the brief time around that. Now, as we are seeing live on through like citizen contributed media, we are seeing that Nakba is ongoing. It's similar to how we talk about in America, in the American context, the Trail of Tears as being a one-time event, but we know firsthand, especially if you are following what's happening with the Keystone XL pipeline and Standing Rock, is that that Nakba is ongoing as well. And so what's very important for us to sort of like think about, and these things are very simple, and they are simple and they're complicated by these people in power who, one, refuse to reckon with history because they are making a lot of money off of it, and two, and people can give plenty of other reasons why. And I'll also center it at white privilege. You know, as like a white passing Arab, I'll talk about white privilege in another way, but the white privilege that comes in America comes from assimilation and erasure of one's own identity in order to join that wave of people who are divesting themselves from history and moving into a present moment. So I think it's very important for us to recognize that, like, we exist in a historical context and we exist in a present context that is enabling oppression. The $3.8 billion a year that United States gives to Israel every year is something that we can stand against. What we don't have to stay quiet. I might be getting ahead of myself, guys, but we don't have to stay quiet in terms of our own stories, in terms of how we see ourselves. White people, I'm talking to you too, Bo. Like, if you're thinking about where you're, like, asking yourself where my family came from is important, even if that information was taken away from you. Black people, I know that quite, and for many who are here in America for generations, that information was taken away from you. So we got to figure out how to bring that conversation in and mobilize together around those issues, because the separation from history is not something that we need to stand for. We need to bring those uncomfortable conversations in, especially because right now we're paying $3.8 billion in tax money to literally fund the bombardment of Gaza. And we can talk specifically about what's happening with Gaza and why, because Gaza was established, I'm getting ahead of myself, but I'm just going to put it over here, right? So what we hear about Gaza a lot right now, because similar to what Sahar brought up earlier, there's a lot of multiple internally displaced people. So think about it like this: somebody was originally in their village. The Nakba starts in 1948. They are then moved to another village. That village is then cleared out systematically, or refugee camps are cleared out and attacked, and people have to continue to move away from their village. A lot of this internal displacement, multiple internal displacement, is what Native Americans have endured in this country, of multiple generations having to move out and out in order to satisfy the needs of this hungry settler colony that continues to want to establish land and power for its own jurisdiction. Not for anybody else, not for the original inhabitants to continue to live in, because the original inhabitants will have to make them reckon with their identity as settler colonists. So please don't remove yourself from history. So just to briefly talk about Gaza. So what most people in Gaza are people who are from other villages. Many are not from Gaza itself. They were moved there, and Gaza was established as a separate Palestinian entity in 2007, was it? And every 4 years, every 5 years on the clock, in addition to the continuous bombardment, starvation, limiting of resources, limiting of medical services, strangling of anybody's like actual right to exist and to live and to survive and be a human being and have the right to education, the right to healthcare, the right to life. All in addition to these things being denied people from Gaza, at the same time, they endure massive flattening campaigns where United States bombs are being used by the Israelis to massacre people in Gaza. And we have seen it. We saw it in 2009. We saw it in 2014. We saw it now. We are watching this now, live. So this is not something that we have to stand for.
Kamelya brings up something that I'd love to continue going down, but I also want to pause and make sure that we are addressing your questions, because that's why we're here, is to really simplify and streamline this. I want to make sure that Sahar, Kamelya, you both have space to sort of bring up things too, because we don't want to. We're not formal people here. We want to make sure that we're having a free-flowing conversation that's edifying all of you. So. Sahar, do you have anything to add to that?
I mean, Kamelya just keeps making the most beautiful point that I'm like, she just keeps demonstrating it perfect, right? Is that what it sounds like is that our generation is not interested in having these conversations anymore. Okay? This is not what's happening. We have learned collectively from our history and what has happened to us as a people. I reflect a lot on and I would like to put this out there to see how everybody else feels about this. I reflect a lot about our parents, and I don't mean to be stereotypical about Arab right now, but what I'm saying is that we've all heard it. Our parents were like literally beating us over the head, go to school, get an education. You have to go to school. And I just thought about that a lot, right? Like, our parents as refugees, like they had such a different battle with life. Their only concern was survival. They crossed oceans and lands, visited people they've never met before, with the sole intention of making it out alive. And the wisdom that they have parted to us is to study. And I thought about that a lot, because like, what does that mean? What does that mean? Because it can't just mean to get a good job, because some of our family came here just to get a good job. And like Hadi already said, the American dream never really existed to begin with. It's like a fallacy. It just wasn't it. So what could our parents possibly mean by getting an education? And I reflect on that a lot. And I guess what I've come up with, and I would love to hear what everybody else thinks, is that so that we would know that when something is happening to us, that when the powers that be come and colonize in a different language, that we understand them, when they use convoluted language, that we're able to read that. I went to law school, so I wouldn't be able, European Anglo-Saxon law was the reason that my people got displaced to begin with. We talk about the legal basis for Zionist colonization of Palestine and the British Mandate. We're talking about the Balfour Declaration that was written in 1917. Right? We're talking about, and Ali alluded to that, when the legal language of a home for a national home for Jews. So when we're talking about ourselves in relation to our struggle and to our parents, we were meant to understand, meaning to study, to know their language, to understand their history, to see the mechanisms and ways that they bombarded our people with their weapons and intentional underdevelopment of our people, land, and resources, right? And that is so that we know better next time. And that is what this moment in Palestinian uprising, which people on the ground are calling the unity intifada, unity uprising. Our people are demanding unity, right? So when we're talking about not wanting to have the reasons why Gen Z doesn't want to have the same conversations anymore, the reasons why we are moving forward and having these types of conversations of decolonizing our concept, is because we've been in their schools, we've been in their halls of power, we studied in their institutions, we found out what it's like to be in those rooms, and it ain't it. It ain't it. And I think that that is the most revolutionary thing that has been coming up in our Arab communities, as well as the Black liberation communities that I was a part of during the George Floyd uprisings last year. So that is just, my take on the whole trajectory of us understanding why we are here, why we understand that this is not a religious war. This is not a war that can be won on the whim of anybody, of anything, but on principle, but upon principle of liberation and freedom for all people, and the ending of oppressive institutions.
And what Sahar is really getting at is like, what is our role being here as children of the diaspora, as children of separation? And, what is it that the US does, to use, to borrow a word from Angela Davis, how does the US collude with the government of Israel to oppress, murder, and maim Palestinians between the West Bank and Gaza? And it's really important that you all know that post 1948, there was a lot of sort of tokenizing happening where the US was trying to play both sides, but then it soon realized that having a proxy, which is what Israel technically is, it's a safe proxy for the United States in that region. In order for them to be able to have that proxy outweighed any feigned considerations of human rights. And so, the Fourth Geneva Conventions tell us that any occupying power is not allowed to populate their occupied territories. Israel has been doing that since 1967. How are they able to do that? Because the US completely dismisses any kind of attempt at upholding international law. The UN Security Councils that voted that settlements were illegal, guess who vetoes all of those? The United States. Israel's armed to the teeth by the United States. Kamelya alluded to this, $3.8 billion a year, which technically under US law should be going for Israel's quote unquote defense purposes, but Israel uses that to expand their settlements. Also, the United States allows nonprofits in our country, here in America, to help fund those settler expansion projects. That guy, Jacob, that you all saw, Jacob from Long Island, the video where Monal Kurd is, confronting him about stealing her home. He's from fucking Long Island. He's from Long Island, and he has more of a place in those occupied territories than the Palestinians who are indigenous to that land. And so when we talk about, our role here and our own education and our own sort of thinking about what we can be doing, it's really important for us to contextualize that we as a country, that we as a government are complicit and colluding with the US, with the ongoing oppression of Palestinians. One other thing that I want to say, and this dovetails really nicely with what Sahar started us off with, I was involved in Palestine solidarity activism for as long as I can remember, and I was especially involved when I was an undergrad in college at the University of Michigan. And as Kamelya mentioned at the onset, there is sort of a fear that's instilled in us, for good reason, by the way, to sort of hesitate and be cautious about talking about this topic from birth. Our parents raised us on the issue that this is a virtuous cause, a cause that you should always be aligned with, but also recognizing that you are risking yourself professionally and personally. And so we grew up in that context. And when I got to college and I was, feeling more of the rah, 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 there were so many people who told me, be careful, you won't get into medical school, you won't get into law school, you won't get into engineering school, your career will be dismantled. But it's really important for you all to recognize that that type of thinking has been ongoing for decades. And guess what? We're here. And we're all occupying spaces that weren't built for us in sectors all across the spectrum, from government to the nonprofit to service work to artistry. And so what I really want to emphasize is that this concept of making it and then contributing your voice and then contributing your dollars it's a false binary. You should be speaking about this at all times. You should be encouraging young people, and I don't need to encourage young people. As Kamelya said, Generation Z is far ahead of anybody that's ever been working in this area before us. And so I really want to emphasize those points, that we as a country are complicit in this ongoing oppression, and that your role is to make sure that you are speaking up, as Randa mentioned, and that's been parroted by my mom, by the way, who's been showing up to protest for Palestine for the last 40 years, is that this is a unique moment. This is special, and that we really need to capitalize on it. And to capitalize it means to emphasize and underscore to everyone that you have a place here, you have a home here, and that we want you and we need you to speak up.
I want to address a couple of questions in the chat, and I also think something else is that was mentioned in the chat is bringing up one of our. We're getting to the debunking part, so I don't know if y'all are ready to move into that, but we can go there. One thing that was mentioned in Ty's comment is about there's a disturbing and growing coalition of colonizing exploitation among the evangelical right who advocate for mutual destruction in Jerusalem because they think it'll bring about the second coming and rapture. Some of my friends who've also like around the States have been asking me What do I do in terms of speaking to people from like deeply religious evangelical communities whose churches are speaking out, saying like turning this into a religious war? One thing I'm gonna just jump over to this for Muslims, Christians, Jews. It is a deep fallacy to assume that this is a fundamentally religious war. Okay, and I think that's like one of the things that we really need to debunk about this issue is, one, this is period. There are Christians, there are Christians, Muslims, Jews, people of different religious groups within Palestine. There are Afro-Palestinians. There are the Palestinian population is diverse, as well as thinking about the way, I'm just going to briefly talk about Christian Zionism, because that was one of the first things that kind of like got me. I was like, okay, so I need to reckon with the fact that there are about 250 million Christian Zionists in the United States, at least. This was like 10 years ago. I don't know what the number is now, right? So the idea, I need to figure this out, and I would encourage everybody else, if you have resources about this, to figure this out, as to how to have these conversations within a religious context, because the way that Islamophobia also carries on within some of these deeply racist, right? That, what is that thing that was going around Instagram? That essentially, like, some people are not worshiping Christianity, they're worshiping white supremacy. So we need to be able, and at the same time, like within different religious groups, like you need to recognize that there should be no space for religious hatred among groups within our movement and across different groups. So like, let's keep that right there. Two, the Islamophobia, I'm just going to spit something that I didn't know, and when I learned it, it blew my mind, that some people within some Christian communities, I don't know if this is all of them, but these are the special ones that I've talked to personally, including my friend's husband, who later unlearned this. He basically has the idea that this is a religious war. I'm going on a tangent, but it's okay. Believing that it's a religious war, that believing that Muslims are actually following somebody who was listening to the devil. So then therefore this justifies the hatred against 1.8 billion people in the in the world, or 1.6 billion Muslims in the world, because this is what their religious war is driven by, is that Muslims are misguided. These are forms of intolerance that exacerbate this inequality. That's this actually very secular issue that's happening on the ground right now. That is a secular imperialist issue of settler colonialism. Do not forget to remove the religion from this. You put any other name on it and it's the same thing. The only difference is people are using religion to justify Palestinian death. Don't forget that. And so if somebody figures out how to have these conversations in the church, please let me know.
Kamelya, this just goes to touch on identity politics, right? I think that's another outdated form of compartmentalization. Compartmentalization meaning the way that this system uses our identities to pin us against each other, right? If you're Muslim, you belong in this box. If you're Christian, you belong in this box. If you're Jewish, you belong in this box. If you're Arab, if you're Palestinian, you belong here. Lebanese here. Syrian here. And when we're talking about decolonizing, we're talking about Palestinian liberation. We're talking essentially and only fundamentally about decolonizing. And the first step is understanding that all of our identifications that we have used to identify ourselves have been tools of their oppression that they have used against us. Therefore, it makes sense to start shedding those. And one of the biggest examples that I can give that will really hit hard with the Arab community is the Sykes-Picot Agreement. We're all very familiar with the Sykes-Picot Agreement, which is when the French and the British basically took up the Ottoman Empire and divided. They're like, two white boys were like, all right, you get this part, you get this part, you get this part, you get this part, right? That's what the white boys were doing on the map, right? And they drew the lines that divided us. And let me tell you how I know that although I'm Palestinian and I'm always going to be Palestinian, I am Arab. You know, my watan. We say that Al-Quds Hasimat Palestine, Jerusalem is the capital of Palestine, Ardha Arabi, her land is Arab. So with that being said, I'm going to end with a story about my Sido, who when he was here visiting, he came 3 years ago to visit here in the U.S. and he doesn't come here often. And one of the reasons why he doesn't come often is because he hates leaving Palestine, and I don't blame him. But one of the first things he said when he got off the plane was like, "Yalla back al Quds." He's like, "Okay, back to Jerusalem. I don't want to be here." I'm like, share that sentiment, right? But anyway, he talked about how he would go from Palestine to Syria to Iraq, back and forth, no problem. And there wasn't Syria, Iraq, there was Arab, and there was this national unity amongst our people, right? So when we're identifying ourselves as when we just have to keep that consciousness in the back of our mind that, yeah, we can use these terms to identify things. Yes, I'm Palestinian, but in this grouping amongst y'all, I'm a Arab, first and foremost, because that brings the most people. That brings us all together. And that's what Palestine is telling us. Palestine, every single city. And just to bring it another parallel, because sometimes it's very hard, and what the system has socialized us to do is that it's very hard for people to be able to understand things that are not happening right in front of them, right? So let's contextualize the Palestinian uprising a little bit to a more material experience that we have all had or had some experience with in this past summer during the George Floyd uprisings. We saw how every city reacted to the death and murder of George Floyd happening in an instant. Every city in the US was protesting. Now, when we're talking about Palestine, we're talking about Sheikh Jarrah, we're saying that every Palestinian city right now is on fire. Every Palestinian city is protesting. What the US, what the so-called US looked like in this past summer during the uprising, that's what Palestine looks like right now. Our people are on the streets, although we cannot see them, although we are so far away and in diaspora. Like Ali said, we have a duty here to these struggles here. So I just wanted to, show that, and that like compartmentalization and all these identities that are good, so that we can all like better identify themselves, but are also used as tools of repression against one another. So that we're so used to, oh, you're Muslim, but I'm Jewish. We can't inherently get along. Oh, you're, however you identify is how you identify. And some people use that inherently as ways to keep us apart as opposed to keep us together. So just like everything, there's good and bad, right? So being able to weigh, like I said, how right here in this moment in time, I'm Arab with all of you, because we understand that Zionism is not a Palestinian problem. We just talked about how Zionism was in Lebanon. We talked about how Zionism is in Syria. We talked about how Zionism began to occupy Egypt, Africa. We talked about how Kamelya talks about how Zionism here in the US single-handedly was the barrier to Black unity during his time. They broke up the Black United Front. So when we're talking about Zionism, Zionism comes in many manifestations. It is slimy. It is neocolonialism. It is the new systems of oppression. Did we want to move on to a different debunking one? The voice for the voiceless one?
Yeah, I'm clocking the questions and I'm saving them in a separate file, but that's okay. Let's get to the debunking and then we'll get to the questions. I'm saving them. So Hiba, I see your question. Shelby, I think there's one more. Ty, we addressed yours. Yeah, Shelby and Hiba, I got you guys. If anybody else has questions, keep them coming. We're gonna go through this slide, the debunking, because there's some new stuff that I don't think we've even contextualized at this. We haven't they haven't been brought into the discourse. I think we need to talk about. We'll start here. So how do you want this one? I'll start us off. In terms of this idea, one way that we want to think about the unity uprising that's happening right now, the decolonization of Palestine, the uprising in Palestine, is it's very important for us to check ourselves on these ideas of savior complexes, especially in Dearborn, especially those of us in diaspora who have been so I'll speak for myself in particular ways. Like I'll see myself as like somebody who's here in America who has to speak on behalf of people at home, because here I have this like I have an American audience here. Now I have zero right to speak on behalf of anybody but myself. Let me be real with you. But what I am here to do is to and that right there is a little bit of a savior complex, which we have seen in it's one of the major tools of white supremacy. It enables sort of always having a system of the haves and the have-nots without actually having a way of upheaving empire at its root and uprooting sort of imperialism and oppression. Instead of uprooting oppression, enabling the savior complex reinforces oppressive dynamics and reinforces the difference between the oppressor and the oppressed. So this idea of wanting to be the voice for the voiceless, I think what's actually really important for everybody right now is, and especially those who are new to the movement, and I welcome you, I welcome you to the movement, because it's a long ride, but it's a good one. We have parties too. And sort of thinking about, rather than spending time, you must refine your own voice, and you must sort of sharpen your own narrative and see how your own context fits into the greater context of imperialism and in the way that it works in the world today. In addition to leveraging what you can do in your workplace, whether you're a cashier working at a bodega or a corner store in Dearborn or a gas station, you see more people every day. You can be at the lead of the boycott movement. We need you more than anybody else. You know what I mean? And whether you're working as a lawyer or a teacher and these other ways, like everybody has a role to play. And you must uplift Palestinian voices from the ground, because they're telling us what to do. You know, if it wasn't for, it's too soon for analysis and to put names on things, but like, I know that Hamad al-Kurd is a friend of mine, and he said, like, nobody puts up with shit. He doesn't put up with shit. So like, it was very nice for Muhammad to go home and be like, I'm not putting up with this shit. I'm going to tell you what to do. He was speaking to the Dutch government the other day. Like, we need to listen to the voices on the ground and uplift Palestinian voices and not replace their voice with my voice, which is rooted in my own privilege and experience and my own personal sort of set of identities. I'll let somebody else take over. If y'all have something to say, or we can move on. Just tell me what to do.
Just to add a little bit onto this one, just because like I feel like I've been confronted with this as a Palestinian living in Dearborn, surrounded by people who are not Palestinian, who have, you know, more or less have said this kind of stereotypical trope to me. And we talk about the white man's burden, right? This is what that is. We learned that in American history. So this is what that is, right? It is a Zionist tool of effectively, sounds nice. I want to be the voice for the voices, right? Like a humanitarian, like, yeah. But not really. What it does is it strategically and very surgically cuts out Palestinians from being able to speak, because it is not that we are unable to form our own thoughts or able to talk about our own experiences, right? Because there's another layer of class. We're talking about class struggle, right? Because when we're talking about qualification, now is a Palestinian qualified to speak on their own oppression? Do they have these degrees and accolades? Have they gotten like statistics? And you know, it's not that hard. We're talking about uncomplicating it, right? We knew, watching the George Floyd video of Derek Chauvin sitting on the neck of George Floyd, we knew after watching that video one time that was wrong, and we all went to the streets. After watching what was happening in Sheikh Jarrah, what did we do? We went to the streets. So unconsciously, we have all been acting as if it is not complicated, because we unconsciously know that it isn't. And I just want to be able to let y'all know how proud I am of y'all, like Kamelya was saying, because although like you might just be introducing this topic to yourselves right now, this is a conscious step, even though you're consciously doing it. You know what I'm saying? Now is when the action comes to play. So when we're talking about voice for the voiceless, it effectively cuts up. The reason why it is akin to a white supremacist Zionist tactic, because it effectively cuts out Palestinians. And when any strategy, when any kind of tactic cuts out Palestinian voices, it is inherently Zionist. Because what are we trying to fill in the void, right? Palestinians have Noura Harakat talks about this very much, about how the Palestinian narrative has been told by everyone but Palestinians, because she was talking about how she was just another person who wrote another book about Palestine. But then when you look historically at the people who have been writing about Palestine, they have not been Palestinian people. They have not been about and relative to Palestinian own experiences. Have been about other people looking at our experience, other people explaining our oppression, other people witnessing our repression and speaking on that. So this is definitely like a no-no. There is no more voice for the voiceless. It's inherently a tactic that has been used surgically to cut Palestinians out of the circle. We see this again with the ceasefire agreement. We see this again with the ceasefire agreement. In a little like very simple example. Let's say me and Ali have a problem, right? Me and Ali have a problem. Been going on for so long, but instead of me, Sahar, going to Ali to resolve this and coming up with a solution to see how we can move forward, I go to Kamelya. And I'm like, yo, Kamelya, Ali's doing this and that. I want him to do this and that. What do we do? And we agree to something. And then after that agreement, we go and we force it upon Ali and be like, listen, this is what me and Kamelya decided on an issue you and I had together. And if you don't agree with this, we're going to start bombing you again. So when we're talking about the voice for the voiceless, this is how politically a phrase that people think is very harmless, is very nice and cute to say, becomes real life policy when Palestinians are not able to speak on the trajectory of our liberation in the way that things are happening to us. So this is like a real life example of how something as simple as I want to be the voice for the voiceless translate into real life politics, and how we have been effectively cut out, and how that is promoting death of the Palestinian cause. So that's all I have to say about that. We can move on.
I have nothing to add. I think Sahar and Kamelya took care of that masterfully. I will add that one way to provide more agency to Palestinians, if that's something that you're interested in, keeping in mind the strategies that Sahar and Kamelya already shared, is to make it an active voice, is to amplify your voice for those who are actively being silenced. That's the use of the active voice versus the passive voice of the voiceless. And so if you want to be a voice for anyone, you're not. Just be a loudspeaker for those who are being actively suppressed, because that's what liberation movements are about fundamentally.
I'm going to bring in another debunking, and Abs, thank you for saying that specifically, because I think what you're saying really speaks to this last question from Shelby. I'm going to have you think about it because it's a tough one, but Abs is my resident email expert. So I think this question is something that I think you might be able to figure out. I'm down to like strategize. She has a student who wants a recommendation letter for joining the IDF, right? And so like my heart hurts, but we got to talk about it because and so as opposed to, I think Shelby, one approach to take for that is to think about, how do you feel? Like, what if somebody were here in the United States and writing a letter to join, I don't know, what's the equivalent of the Proud Boys? That's like a nonprofit organization. You know what I mean? Like something like that. What would your gut tell you in terms of like, I'm going to leave it there. Like, I support your journey and your life and blah, blah, blah. And I really think you should think twice about this. A part of me just wants to say like, ignore the email, but I'm not going to, that's the old me. The new me is going to face problems head on. But that's a really important question. I'm excited to get us to answer it. I'm going to go through one more debunking issue, which is, which is the lure of assimilation, this idea that this is effectively how silencing works, whether you're talking about the colonization of Palestine, the normalization of Palestinian death, the normalization of, I'm going to go back to the war in Iraq, which is still arguably ongoing, and how you think about in terms of police brutality. This is what they tell us to do. They tell us to be quiet. I have to blend in and be quiet in order to be successful. The less they know about me and my politics, the better. No, you got your job, you got your position because you are qualified for it. This fits very perfectly in line with imposter syndrome, my friends. And so like, this is work that we have to do because If they invite you into the room, but they cut your tongue, you're not really invited into the room. You got to remind them that you invited me into the room because of my expertise, and I am adding value to your organization, to your company, to your et cetera, because of my intuition. And I'm actually pushing us forward to a more just solution, and not one that's going to create more problems down the line for the rest of you guys. So please think about this idea of the lure of assimilation, and it didn't work for our parents' generation, and it's not working for us. Anybody want to add anything? I'm gonna keep it going. This idea of debunking the focus in terms of the media narrative, the focus is only on women and children, right? Abs, I want to tag you to talk about this one.
It's very simple. I think that there's no more dehumanizing a line in the English language than, quote, including women and children, because it automatically denotes that men and boys who are perceived as men, and also, by the way, that's an active process that we parrot here in the United States when we think about Black boys being Black men. It's the same sort of system of how we think about Palestinian boys who are perceived as Palestinian men. These kids are 9, 10, 11, 12. These are boys. But the idea that men are not and cannot be victims. Maya Mikdashi wrote a really fundamental, elemental piece on this in 2014 in Jadaliya magazine, which is co-founded by Noor Arakat, and I highly recommend it to all of you. But the idea is quite simple here, is that Palestinian men don't deserve to die either. Palestinian boys don't deserve to die either. And I want to draw a direct link to the United States, because it is the same exact conversation we're having here when we think about Black boys who are being imprisoned and the sort of adultification of Black men. They're stripped of their innocence without any conversation whatsoever. And so let's try to abolish language like including women and children, and let's bring back men into the conversation, not in some kind of perverse sort of, pro-men, systematic sort of rights movement, but it's the fundamental idea that Palestinians of all creeds, all stripes, all genders, all orientations have a right to exist too. And maybe if Sahar and Kamelya have nothing to add, we can go on to the next one. Cool.
I can start off this one. So we touched on Zionism, right, as a political ideology, and that the way that it operates is very akin and parallel to racism here in the U.S. and the way that that we recognize American history to have progressed. So I know that a lot of us in the diaspora were unfortunate enough, or not fortunate enough, to grow up learning a revolutionary history of our land and our, and our people and all the things that we've done. But it's fortunate that we learned their history, because now we can spin that and use it in a way that's helpful for us. And this is what I suggest for people. Because although we might not understand the realities everyday realities in Palestine right now, because we do not live there, because I do not live there, we know exactly what it was like to, we know exactly because we were taught, not exactly, but we were taught what it was like here in the reality on the ground during Jim Crow, during segregation. And we know because the U.S. has taught us their history, and in their own historical context of what the so-called U.S., there's history that shows the oppressed overcoming segregation, the oppressed overcoming these laws, that we're still doing those things today, right? And in Palestine, and we know that inherently here, in the context of American history that we were taught that segregation is bad. That's why it's ended. Well, segregation exists right now in Palestine. Segregation is very real right now back home in Palestine, right? So if we understand the concept of Jim Crow and segregation, of policing, of the concept of police, the genesis of policing in this country and the way that it existed on this land, the way that it came out was to make sure, we're talking about private property, we're talking about capitalism, we're talking about that at the root of capitalism, the only thing that is guarded, that is safe, protected is profit, which is termed as private property. And private property, law teaches us, what I learned in law school is that private property can come in the form of two things: people and resources and land. I'm sorry, three things, right? People, resources, and land. And capitalism has colonized all three of those things. Capitalism colonized African people. They brought them from their homes with the intention of exploiting their labor in order to take from the money that they make and give them nothing and use them that way. Zionism, as racism, is coming into Palestine taking out, ethnically cleansing all its people to make room for people that is not for the indigenous people. So when we're talking about Zionism, and we're talking about how it's modern day neo-colonialism, settler colonialism, we're talking about how Zionist occupation of the Gaza, the reinforcement of Gaza, is for one purpose and one purpose only: to test out methods and tactics and strategies of repression. And I'm not just talking about weapons. I talked earlier today about food. I talked earlier today about the resources that are left in and out. I'm talking about the land, water, and sea are patrolled by Israelis, by Israeli occupation forces. So when we're talking about Zionism, and then we see the border wall, the apartheid border wall that I saw in real life that has that a personal thing, that wall, and we're talking about ethnic cleansing. Ethnic cleansing means, so we can break apart that word, ethnic. What is ethnic? We're talking about our people, our land, our resources, our culture. And cleansing, the taking away, getting rid of, right? And what that means, me as a Palestinian, how I'm going through ethnic cleansing, it means that the house that I used to spend every other summer in as a kid, I am no longer able to stay in. It means that my kids, that my history, that anything that I would want to recreate, the privilege of recreating my child, the privilege of taking my children back home and telling them that this is where I live. None of our parents had that privilege here. All of our parents came here as refugees. So when we're talking about ethnic cleansing, we're talking about Zionism as a modern day example. We're saying that the tactics that IDF use on the Gaza, people of Gaza, the Palestinian people of Gaza, they train the police force here in the US. We're talking about the apartheid wall that separates Palestinian land, people, and her resources is the same wall that Trump started to build here in the US. We're talking about the checkpoints and surveillance techniques that the Zionists have perfected on Palestinian people. They implement here in the US, and I will give you another personal example. So just so I really want you to understand that this is not, I'm not trying to convince anybody. This is all the truth. These are all factual things that you can look up yourself, because we know how Zionism colonized. We understand it, it's historical, they've documented it all. But the only thing that they never anticipated is that we were going to learn their language, because that's how they colonize. You know, James Baldwin, and I'm going to end with this, James Baldwin does a very beautiful job of explaining to a white reporter that the problem isn't the death and destruction of Black people. The problem is that you buried your corpses and didn't think that they were going to come back out and get you, that they weren't going to come out and respond. They weren't going to come out and retell your history. And that is a tragedy, right? Kamelya, we talked about how he's been unable to reckon with the history and tragedy. And that is what Zionism is about.
Thank you, Sahar. I take a deep breath every time you talk, sis. It's good. Thank you. We've already covered this one. Somebody want to take this one?
We touched on this. I can send that Hassan Kanafani video. I think that'd be really, really cool. It's a 6-minute video. He talks about how, and we're talking about language again, and we're talking about how it is important to call something what it is. It is not a conflict, because a conflict implies so many things. A conflict implies that there's two autonomous entities that are very equal in power and able to negotiate. A conflict does not imply a military occupation. A conflict does not imply the sanctions and destructions of property of the of ethnic cleansing. So when we're talking about conflict, it talks about, like, you know, it's kind of like that old adage here in the US where if you work hard enough, you know, we all start off at the same plane, and if you work hard enough, you'll be able to get what you want. You know, you just didn't work hard enough to get the job that you wanted. You just didn't work hard enough to get the thing that you wanted. When we understand that this is not a conflict, we don't have to continue having conversations. Hassan Kanafani talks again. He says again, and he taught us what to say when white European people who do not understand our history as a movement, our history as a liberation struggle, he says that the reason that you have all your questions is because you call it a conflict, and it would make it justifiable. So if you were to continue calling it a conflict, but what I'm doing is giving you language. I'm telling you that it's not a conflict. And nowhere in history has there ever been conversation between an oppressor and the oppressed. There is no conversation to be had. And he said it's like having a conversation with the sword in the neck. And I'm going to leave it at that.
Thank you. I'm also going to add that I don't even feel comfortable using the term war anymore, even, you know, like conflict is done. I can't even call it war. So I say that to uplift the fact that like language is really slippery, and we must be intentional and impeccable with the words that we choose, and to not recycle. I encourage you guys to use your own language, so as to not recycle what the sort of dominant discourse has been feeding us for decades. I think, guys, I think we might have to skip this second journal.
I was going to recommend something if I could. Maybe we
Please.
skip past the slides. Maybe we remove the slides. Maybe we allow
Go to
each of us,
questions.
if we want, sort of a closing now or after the questions. But I think it would be more fruitful if we can hear directly from people and, you know, help them debunk some myths too. How do you all feel about that?
That's great.
Let's do it.
I'm good with going to questions. Yeah.
We got a couple of questions in the chat. The first one, whichever you guys feel comfortable to touch on. First question is from Hiba, who, first, Shelby's question at the top. What is driving the US to give so many weapons and money?
So that's a good question. And that means that we have to take a step back, right? Because again, if we're understanding that Zionism is not a Palestinian problem, that means that the US interests and imperial interests are also bigger than Palestine, right? And with that being said, the whole entire framework of settler colonialism that is honestly main spread everywhere, but exists right now in Palestine, is due to one force and one force only: capitalism, which imperialism is the highest form of capitalism, which is the current form that we call. So capitalism was the pre-existing stage, but now scholars and revolutionaries have noted this difference actually back in the 60s and 70s, that capitalism was in its highest stage, imperialism. So when we're talking about imperialism, it means capitalism. And the sole motivating force of capitalism is profit. Get money, however you can, take everything you can. And I know, and that's something that they've imbued in us, right? Like we said, one of the myths that we were debunking was to assimilate, and then once you get in, you say something, right? And that's the whole entire concept. We want to protect our own interests. We want to protect the ability to make money, to be able to profit in a system that we know is inherently against us. So when we're talking about why the US arms Israel with weapons and money, is because I'm gonna give you a line by Joe Biden, who's the current president of the United States. Joe Biden, a little history on him and Biden's history is that he was one of the best friends of Golda Meir. Golda Meir is one of the Israeli Ministry of Defense people who a lot of many of y'all are probably familiar with this line of that one of the debunking myths that we didn't have to do, our ancestors had to do, was that Palestine was a land without a people for a people without a land, Zionist, right? Golda Meir coined that term, that phrase, that Palestine was used in Western propaganda as a land without a people for a people without a land. So Joe Biden, that was his boy. Second, Joe Biden in AIPAC, which is the American-Israeli Political Action Committee, which is the biggest Israeli lobbying force in DC and across. He said very explicitly, if Israel did not exist, modern day Israel did not exist, the US would have to create one. And with that being said, again, Google it. Literally, Joe Biden said this. I'm not making this shit up. Anyway, and with that being said, the only interest that US has in Palestine, which is within SWANA, which is the Southwest Africa, Asia, North African region, is for resources to get money. It's that simple. We are uncomplicating it because the system in which we live under is imperialism, and the sole motivating force, again, under imperialism is exploitation, meaning get money however you can, no matter how many people have to die. And that is something that you don't have to take my word for it. American history, European history of conquering and colonization, like Ali talked about, it was to be a colonizer was a great term. People literally like talked about it in such reverence, like, oh yeah, like we're colonizing, like it was something until it became a dirty word, right? So I hope that answers your question of why the US feels the need. You know, and Kwame Ture also talks about how that Israel is a baby arm and extension of US imperialism. Because if the US would stop giving money to Israel, i.e., exemplified by its request for another $1 billion, including, in conjunction with the 3.8 billion that they already received. If the US stopped giving tax money to Israel, it would completely.
I want to add one thing, which is also, we know how, many of us already know how the US policing works in this country. Its history of being fundamentally a racist entity, which was essentially there to protect what the white colonists and settlers in this country believed that people could be property, right? So like the function of the police is the protection of property in order to enforce certain ownership of property. We already have examples of the Tulsa massacre and other massacres and other neighborhoods and other prosperous Black neighborhoods, which had economic independence, which had people that like communities, like even in Detroit, 75 was paved over, was after the destruction and ethnic cleansing of Paradise Valley and Black Bottom. So the idea of America supporting Israel is also about American policing. And so one thing that Sahar has brought into the space, and it's been a collaborative research effort between, led by PYM, the Palestinian Youth Movement, is this program called the Deadly Exchange Program, where police in the United States travel to Israel and undergo trainings with the Israeli army. They learn certain kinds of, even Krav Maga, which some people have heard of as like a martial arts thing, that was invented by Israel. As a way to literally crumple the bodies of children, Palestinian children, if you want me to be very explicit about that. So I say all that to say that American policing and Israeli policing is in Arabic we say tizen fard al-bais, 2 asses and 1 underwear.
Just a quick sort of tie on that. Last summer, after the uprisings, the racial uprisings, we heard a lot of conversation about rioting and destruction of property, but we nary heard a word from those same individuals about police brutality, anti-Blackness, and systemic institutional racism. And so when you're finding yourself talking about the rioting and destruction that's rooted in this conception of property, I think it's really important to recognize that America, our emblem is exporting white supremacy to the rest of the globe, and that the Confederate flag that we saw marched in a lot of those areas last summer and also in the Capitol in early January, that cause that still exists today, it's paying homage to a cause where people believed property to be the cornerstone of civilization. And that was not just during the era of civil war and the era of slavery, that continues today. And so when we think about property, it's really important to draw connections and links between what we do here in the US, what we've never reconciled with in the US, and what's happening there. And just to sort of finish off what Sahar started, just take Joe Biden's words when he was a senator in 1987. He said that if Israel didn't exist, we would have to create Israel. So we have time for another question. So there's a good one here. Oh, yeah, sorry, Cam. I'll go ahead and read this. One thing I struggle with is having conversation with Jewish peers who do see Israel as central to Judaism. It's hard to feel like I'm not gaslighting someone when I'm trying to tell them that something they believe really strongly is inaccurate. How can we have this conversation without being disrespectful towards Jewish friends, loved ones who do feel a strong religious tie to Israel? Sahar?
Again, I think that the title of this webinar was in order to have a fact-based conversation about Palestine, meaning that it isn't about emotion, it isn't about opinion, it isn't about how you feel. It isn't. It's about what is the truth, what are the principles that Zionism exists on, and the reason why it occupies Palestine. We're talking about the unjust, the unmoral, the unethical ethnic cleansing and displacement of Palestinians. This whole entire thing of catering to the way that people feel. in relation to the words that you use is a Zionist tactic. I mean, we see that there's multiple videos of, they call it crocodile tears, right? Like, we see it all white women, the Karen, where they just want to start crying immediately when you tell them that they're racist, right? We see this like iteration of like different types of barriers that come into Palestinian spaces when we're talking about trying to be free. So like, so to me, the work that our generation is to do is to take away the emotion, because we understand this is not a religious war. We already talked about this. We said it is not I'm sorry, not war. We talked about not using that word as well. This is not an occupation principled in its religious right, first of all. And that is contradictory, because if God is just, God will not choose some people over another people, if we talk about God being just, right? So we understand it not to be religious. This conversation must be fact-based. It must be historically based in context, or else it will continue to be used as a Zionist tactic to erase the Palestinian narrative, because I just won't be cycled into that conversation, because then what it goes to is the whole entire consequence of effect, right? We're not talking about, oh, do Jews, should they be safe? That's not the question here. We're not talking about the religion of Judaism. We're talking about Zionism as a political ideology that has come to occupy Palestinian land, people, and resources that cannot exist anymore. And that must be a fact-based conversation. And this also goes back to Kamelya's point in wanting to deconstruct Israel in Judaism and Zionism, right? We know that Israel is a Zionist entity because that is the principles in which it is formed on and organized on. We know that Judaism is a religion, and we understand that religion is not the context in which that this liberation struggle, this national liberation struggle must be viewed in. We know this cannot be right, because that has only brought confusion and it only brought disarray to our organizing. So what I would suggest is maintaining a facts-based conversation and underscoring the issue that this is not a religious war. This is not a religious conflict, war, nothing. I mean, those are all the terms that they've used.
Thank you, Sahar, for that. And quickly, I just want to add, I don't want to be paternalistic or any kind, I don't want to talk down to anybody. But what I do want to say is that I think that people who have been recruited to be Zionists through their upbringing as Jewish people in the United States or elsewhere context, I think a lot of those people have been gaslit already. And I think that one thing is to really if you have the time and energy to have a compassionate conversation with a Zionist, which if you have the time and energy to do it, I encourage you to do it. It's not unpainful. I will say that. I used to teach an Arab Jewish dialogue, and Abs used to teach the same one in a different year. But I say that, prepare yourself for trying to wake somebody up, and ask them questions like, have you been there? What did you see? What did they show you? If they've gone on birthright, rather than, you can give them information. You can say, listen, I've got I've got resources. I've been learning about this, et cetera, et cetera. It's an apartheid system that's happening right now. But what have they told you? Ask them, join in that inquiry and conversation with them, because compassion is the place to go. And I think somebody from JVP had said, truth is like a river, it runs in one direction. So as Sahar is saying, when people, you see a lot of people joining there. I put some anti-Zionist Jewish organizations in the chat. You'll see, and most of those folks, some of those are my friends, will say, I grew up as a Zionist. And some of them are Arab Jews or Iranian Jews who grew up as Zionists. And then they shifted away from the Zionism because they realized they were being brainwashed and that racism was being fed to them daily and very powerfully.
So I know we only have 2 minutes, and it's probably not enough time for more questions. I just want to make sure that each of the panelists gets sort of an opportunity to share a final word. Is that okay? Kamelya, maybe we can start with you.
My final word is I want to answer one question. That's what I'm going to quickly do, because the question is asking for how did you address the culture of fear in terms of speaking out for Palestinians? How did you personally get past that? And I want to give you a personal story about that, right? It's really been one, my journey, I've always had to be comfortable knowing that I'm always banging on the side door of every room of every house that I enter, if you'll accept that metaphor, right? Like I recognize that I had come from a minoritized view, or a view that does not that is a disempowered view. However, I know that the numbers are on my side. I know that I have to stay connected to my heart. And part of the work of being in America is about disconnecting your heart from the work that you're doing, right? If you're working in corporate America and, say you're working at Quicken Loans and you got to call an old man and tell him that he's going to have a 20% interest rate for his house, for his mortgage, that's the only way he's going to get a house. What does your heart say about that, sweetie? You know what I mean? And so always check in with your heart, because the part of the work of becoming capital W white, capital A assimilation in America is about disconnecting from an ethical or moral code that is outside of capitalism and imperialism. They're putting us in these positions in order to strangle us into silence. And so my personal journey is just arming myself with information continuously, watching documentaries, reading books, surrounding myself with community, that because I know I'm not alone in this. And we've been organizing together for years, and some of us knew, but I know that when I meet new folks in the movement, I know that I trust that we're coming from a same place and that we're all fighting to see a just world. And I do believe that it's going to happen in our lifetime. So you gotta have hope, faith, and don't disconnect from your heart, and back yourself up with information. And even if you don't got information, you've got your own story to tell, and you could tell that story. Your feelings are valid. I pass the mic.
Thank you, Kamelya. Sahar? I'm also happy to go.
However you want.
Go for it.
Okay. So last words. Join the PYM. Okay. Anyway, so to plug that in right quick, you know what I'm saying? Anyway, so on a very serious note, I would like to end with kind of like the same kind of exercise of how we started. My work in liberation struggle and learning how to fight every day for my people, my experience came from organizing in the Black liberation struggle during George Floyd's uprising last year in the summer. I met people who, I met the most amazing people, right? And then a year later, it's been a year since George Floyd's uprising. So May 29th was actually, I was a part of the Detroit Will Breathe uprisings that were happening every single day when we were protesting downtown. And on May 29th, it was a year since we were out in the streets. And I want to point out this one development in our struggle, right? Because people think revolutions and uprisings are, there's debunkings around those, right? We have to talk about that. Revolutions and uprisings do not happen overnight. They do not happen overnight. They are not inherently violent, because what we are doing as revolutionaries is building. And as scientists, we understand that two things cannot occupy the same thing at the same time. So we understand what that means. Lastly, is that we all learn from one another. And I'm going to end with this story of my own personal experience and my shared love for the Black liberation struggle and the connections and ties of camaraderie that I have made in fighting for liberation of Palestinian lives. And we started a year ago. We all came together and we were chanting Black Lives Matter. And at the end of a year, we were saying free, free Palestine. The same group of people every single day when we were protesting were saying free, free Palestine without me even being there. They were holding up Palestinian flags without me even being there. They were all wearing kufiyas and understanding and saying Zionism is racism since our entire time together. So our struggle is moving forward. It is not something, people are not inherently cynical. People are inherently loving. People are inherently wanting for freedom. People inherently want freedom, which is why we unconsciously go through the streets whenever we're oppressed, because we understand that to be the historical forum for us, right? So I would love to end this, my parting words is that work is happening. People are organizing. Please join the PYM. The Palestinian Youth Movement is a transnational organization. Whether or not you're located in here in Michigan, we have chapters everywhere. Plug into somewhere, plug into not just the PYM, join an organization, start learning how to properly organize and, defend our people, because the people back home are not willing to go back home. They're staying in the streets. And that means that we have work to do here. So thank you guys for having this space for me. Love y'all. For Palestine, yo. And I'll see you guys. Also, I'm gonna plug in our action. We're having an action, we're mobilizing for Nexa. Nexa is, again, the how to be word for setback. And it's, we talked about Nakba, the continuation. We talked about Nexa, how since 48 was Nakba, Nexa 67, right? And in 67, that is when Israel can spread its military occupation over the whole of Palestine. And that's what we're protesting on Saturday at 5 p.m. at Ford Woods. It's going to be a march and a community event where we're going to also do another writing exercise like this one that Kamelya offered. So if you guys like that, come and be a part of it and learn how to be a part of the community and be a part of people and learn how to interact with other people's struggles, because the only way we're going to get through this is by unifying, and the only way to unify is to become proximate. So I hope to see you all on Saturday.
Thanks, Sahar. I just want to quickly add, I've been thinking a lot about like collective memory, and I've been thinking about the power of memory. I was watching a video the other day of a Palestinian grandmother, 94 years old, who was telling the story of her first love. It was a gorgeous story that I'm sure you can find if you just Instagram it. But I also think about like Mahmoud Darwish, who's one of my favorite humans to ever have lived, a Palestinian poet and resistance person, who said once, خوف الغزاة من الذكريات, which means the invader's fear of memory. And I think a lot about history, which I think is the most important analytical tool that's so underutilized in our society, especially here in America. But history really is a set of observable facts, like Sahar alluded to. And the Zionist settler project, it's not a subjective thing. It has a material reality. There are founders, there's a history there, there's a sort of strategy and a mission, there's victims. And the victims are Palestinians, and what's happening in Palestine is unconscionable. We should always bring that to the forefront, that what's happening there is unconscionable, but also to remember that we live in a country that suppresses its own history, that, we have an equally unconscionable history with settler colonialism that we tend to sort of cover over with the scar issue of time. We encourage historical amnesia. We don't want to be confronted with facts and realities and people that might be a little bit too hard for us to fathom. And so we also suppress our crimes here in America. And so, in Palestine, it's increasingly fashionable to think about this as a Greek tragedy, as something that's both sides, as something that's a conflict and a war, or even worse, to view settler colonialism as a necessary inevitability, which is something that was completely fashionable for hundreds of years. But, W.B. Du Bois once wrote that to best guide humanity forward, we need to tell the truth about our history so far as the truth is ascertainable. And so what I want to leave off with is in encouraging you all to think about thinking about history as ascertainable facts by having a radical imagination, by believing genuinely of that radical transformation is possible. So let's visualize the bus ride from Jerusalem to Gaza. Let's visualize the dinners in Haifa. Let's visualize the dismantling of the apartheid wall, the concrete checkpoints. Let's visualize a society where all people, irrespective of faith, orientation, class, get to enjoy a beach outing on the shores of Gaza together. Make sure you're celebrating Palestinian joy. Let's do the work necessary to decolonize our minds, to decolonize our hearts, to decolonize our work. Let's insist on using language that describes the crimes visited upon Palestinians. Let's capture the memories that serves as our guiding light, like the grandmother that I alluded to. Talk to your elders, record their stories, share their stories. These memories are our superpower, and the invader fears the memories. So it's never too late to do the right thing, no matter who you are, no matter what role you occupy, no matter what your views and perspectives in the past. You have a home here in this liberation movement. So each of you can make a difference by joining people of conscience all around the world in adopting your own life and pushing your elected officials to adopt the global BDS movement, to boycott Israel, to divest from Israel, and to sanction Israel. Justice for Palestine, resistance until liberation, period.
Well, on that very powerful note, thank you all. Thank you all for being here. Thank you to our speakers. You all created such a powerful space for everybody to learn. We will be sending out not only the email with the recording, but resources that our speakers have provided to us, and then information about Saturday. So thank you all. Looking forward to having more conversations in the future. All right.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye, guys.